Action!
Welcome, everybody, to the Hidden Pearls podcast. Bruce and I are here with Yanti Amos, the Ninja Warrior, Yogi-Ninja Warrior. So we're very excited. There's so many different facets to who you are. So we thought that BK might read your bio, just because.
Shortened. So anyway, I'm just going to give you just a little bit.
So welcome to the show, Yanti.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Bruce.
And especially this is her 15th anniversary. So apparently they needed some space or something. I don't know, but they've been traveling the last few days apparently together, and they were fine about being separated from the romantic clutches of love for just a few moments. So we're grateful for that. So thank you for taking that time. So, I'll just start as a backdrop even before I do that. So I kind of stumbled on you when you were on Instagram just over the last year plus. I can't remember exactly. And you're putting out there all the peace and love and yogi, and then you got the karate stuff going. I'm like, who is this? Anyway, and so then when we kind of connected, you remembered, and I didn't know it, but anyway, George and I came to what was then your studio, Earth Yoga NYC, I believe I have it correctly.
Right,
and we were in town. Yeah. So we were in New York, I believe it was 2018, and we were in town for WWE, and I made George get up and go to a hot yoga, and he was not overly thrilled with me, but
that might have been one of the last ones he's been to.
Right. Anyway, but I love doing that when I'm visiting like a city like that, and just pick especially a big metro, there's always yoga studios all over. And so that just was an accidental. And then you actually sent a pic because we shared that after we took it. And
that's right.
Yeah. So we have that picture, and Emma will I don't know, she'll do whatever she does to kind of shoot that in. But anyway, so that was really cool just to know that we've been in your studio and been through a class. And then I kind of remembered the whole thing when you sent us the picture. So anyway, that was pretty good stuff. So we've actually known each other for years, for a whole hour for hot yoga. But anyway, all right, this is the quick bio. And her kind of tag everywhere is the Yogi-Ninja, which we really like. So we'll unpack that too. But anyway, born to Indonesian parents in Australia. She's a former international lawyer, now mostly recovered and healed, we think, but we'll find out. And has been a mentor and leader in the wellness industry for almost 20 years. And that journey has looked like a little bit like this. It includes both karate and yoga. And over the years, she's been able to kind of blend those fields and kind of find a way to find balance within that. So we're going to talk about that. She's also very grounded and practitioner in mindfulness meditation and breath work. Very fluent in those fields as well, which is kind of a basis for all the work that we do. So we're very excited to talk to you about that. Strong advocate for women and families, and has worked with and around domestic violence for a long time. And she's a faculty member now of the Warrior Flow School, and you lead the women's circle that is part of that. So and there's a whole bunch more too. So anyway, so I guess just very welcome. And so thank you for doing that. And there's so many overlapping fields that, as I was following you and got to talk to you and do all those kind of things, I thought this is a great one. And I think the other thing too for us is that we're trying to be really intentional about hosting and telling stories. So our podcast is about uniting people through storytelling.
Yeah.
And we're very appreciative of your role, particularly as a woman. And so we'd like to try to highlight the women leaders that we have in these fields that are out there. And so you'll work in that regard, because I think unless you've been through that, I think, at least in my experience, it's always raises a few more issues and or obstacles and or raises the bar a little bit when you're trying to be a female entrepreneur in that way. So anyway, so we're super grateful to have you here. So I guess where we wanted to start, and you can add, is there anything you can fill in any more of the bio as we're going? So I'll give you the mic here in just a second. So your story after growing up in Australia and born to Indonesian parents, and I know there's a whole story there. So I listen to those podcasts and just being different in Australia and those whole things. And so you can weave any of those kind of things in, but eventually went to law school. You had some family members who were judges, I think.
Yeah.
And some and other people. Were lawyers. And so kind of influenced that way. Went to law school and then practiced about 17 years, if I have it right. So somewhere between year 15 and 17, life knocked on the door, and there was some kind of revelation to you that whatever you were doing at the time either wasn't who you wanted to be, wasn't what you wanted to do, and something like that. So I guess if you're okay, can we pick the story up there? And just, I guess the things that we're really curious about are like, what were the signs that were kind of, was it physical, emotional, whatever, however people read that. And then, how did you walk through that path to make those decisions and all that kind of stuff? So pick it up there if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, when you have a physical injury, you start to question what is going on in your life on many levels. And what happened to me around 2003 is I was playing competitive polo, and I was playing every weekend in a league, and I was traveling internationally for these competitions. And when you play polo on horseback, you go at great speed, and it's like rugby on horseback. And I was playing in mixed teams, so I was playing with guys. And what happened to me was I was T-boned, and I had this guy ram into the center or the midline of my horse, and I fell. So I toppled over the front of my horse. I landed on my right hip. I damaged my whole right side of the body, and from then on, I knew I either was going to have surgery or I was going to do a long period of rehab, which I did subsequently do. And during that time, I just questioned everything. So I guess what I did have was an existential crisis. And I asked myself, what the heck am I doing? Am I enjoying it? Life is short. What should I do from here on in if I'm able to get up and walk normally again? It was a little bit like that. And I just had all these questions in my head over a 9-month period. I just self-questioned a lot. And I am just naturally an introvert. I am quite a shy person. And so I spend a lot of time alone, even though obviously Richard, my husband, he kind of gets it, even though we love time together. I do get a lot out of introspection, journaling, and meditation. And so during that period, I found myself asking those questions. And I was really honest with myself, and I said, do I want to have the surgery, or can I find ways to heal myself in a sort of holistic way? And I explored the idea of beginning with osteopaths in France, where the accident happened and where I was based at the time, because I was kind of between London and Paris, because I was still doing my legal work at that point. I, long story short, decided, okay, I'm going to try and do this thing they call yoga, right? And it wasn't really a modality that a lot of people chose, because you just go straight to surgery and you go straight to the mainstream choices that you can take if you have a serious injury. And I decided to go that path, which is more modality that was not mainstream, shall we say, and conventional. And I went into that route of traditional Chinese medicine and yoga and meditation. And during that period, I, just made a lot of self-discoveries, and I realized that there was another path aside from, and perhaps in addition to, mainstream and conventional medicine. So I worked alongside osteopaths and doctors and specialists and so on, but I really relied heavily for the mindset portion of my healing on the yoga and on the meditation and on the mindset training and just confidence building. So that's a sort of a short version of what happened when I decided to sort of change gears and switch a little in terms of not just what I did to heal, but also what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it was kind of drastic, but it was the beginning of this path, this journey towards yoga and meditation.
Okay.
So how fast, because on that path, obviously and when you say traditional Chinese medicine, could you tell us some of the other modalities that you use? Like, were you doing acupuncture or herbs and?
Yes, all of that, Emma. I was doing, because at the time, I don't know, and I may not have mentioned it, but I have type 2 diabetes. So I was on traditional Chinese medicine for the type 2. And I was also on it for the healing process of the fall from a great height at great speed. And I didn't actually fracture anything, but I did fall quite heavily on the entire right side. And so I was having to go through PT, physical therapy, for just learning how to walk again and to feel the confidence of feeling symmetrical in the way that my gait was post fall. And so, acupuncture, I did the herbs, and I did a lot of osteopath sessions in France. They were very, very keen on osteopathy. And I just where I could, I tried to go the more natural route. And and I have to say I don't regret it at all, because it then led me to this journey of, as I said, the yoga and meditation. There was a beautiful older lady who lived in the area who offered yoga classes around the corner from me. Where I was in Chantilly, which is north of Paris, is a traditional, it's a race course, and it's known for its equestrian activities. And I was there with a whole bunch of jockeys also injured, and together we were doing asana, but we were also doing breathing, and we were just slowly but surely rehabbing. And we were there together in this beautiful community, and it was kind of wild because I didn't realize the power of yoga until that experience. And it's nothing that I had ever experienced before, because I was so reliant on Western medicine prior to that.
Okay. Now, all good. I love all that. I'm just saying, though, you've been in law, international law. You've practiced in different countries. You're fluent in French. Indonesia. You've been around, all this kind of stuff. And you have a developed practice in the hustle and bustle of all that. So, I've been through that myself. So, so here you are, what looks like, oh, that's a terrible accident. In a way, it's like life happens for us instead of to us. And you took that opportunity. And so there must have been other things in your life, though, that were bubbling up in a way that said, man, I'm not very satisfied. Because I can see taking the pause, but if law was super fulfilling and you were still loving it, so there must have been in that break when you got away from law because you were in the hospital or wherever doing your rehab. So that all came together, but it's still a huge leap to say, I'm not going back to law. So you get hurt in polo, and then you take 9 months to rehab and you never go back to practicing law again. So what was it that was so conclusive for you? And then you start doing yoga just as a matter of rehab. And then 6 years later, you open your own studio.
Yeah.
So, I'm just where did you have the confidence just to walk away from law? And what was it that was you knew, I'm done? So there must have been something like that. And then, just because you did some PT with yoga, that doesn't. I'm going to open a studio in 6 years in New York.
You actually hit on a great point, Bruce, and thank you for bringing it up, because it was almost like it was a convergence of many other aspects that were not going wrong, but were not ideal in my life at the time. And in terms of a timeline, what had happened was I was getting to the point in my first marriage where we were trying to do therapy and we were trying to work on the marriage itself. And I think we came to a realization that it wasn't going to work. And so many things, as I said, many things after many attempts at trying to make things work seemed to be a metaphor for so much other stuff that was going on in my life. And having attempted and tried and experimented and made enormous efforts to make all the facets in my life work well, because I was so used to being able to conquer and understand how to make something successful, things weren't. And that's why I called it an existential crisis. So forgive me for diminishing the power of so many other aspects that were going on simultaneously. But you're absolutely right that it was a convergence, and it was almost like a message from above that something has to give. And that made me do all the self-questioning. It made me ask all the real questions about the so-called meaning of life for me. And that's what started that whole kind of, I call it a spiral, but it was a need to get completely real.
Yeah.
And to get very honest with myself on all aspects of things that were just so unsatisfactory is not the right word, but just unfulfilling, but also getting truthful for the benefit of all the parties concerned, just to be fair on all fronts. And so, it was for one of the first times in my life where I was going to just make a really honest and a very concrete next step.
Right.
Instead of, and I'm the type of person, I grew up feeling never good enough and I always felt like I just wasn't doing enough to get by or to be successful. And call it parenting, you can call it a lot of stuff, and it might actually go back to the whole immigrant experience. But whatever you want to attribute it to, I did feel like I needed to get beyond that, trying to people please, trying to do what people expect of me. And instead, I wanted to do what was right for me and authentic. I hate the word authentic, because it's so bandied about and it's overused. But it was kind of a need to be true to what I wanted ultimately to be doing for the rest of my life. And I don't know, does that make sense? Because it was absolutely a...
Yeah. Well, I guess I would just say, I think that's what happens in life and in way, and it's just the way in which like the mind will dump its stuff into the body. I think in the way the universe, it'll converse. If you're out of alignment with your true self, and I hear what you're saying about authenticity, but there is a sense of, the 4 stages of the self, right, are know the self, heal the self, and then you can be yourself, and then you can share yourself. And so, and if we're living a life that is not authentic to our true being, at some point, say, like your body, your mind, your spirit, and the universe are all going to say, dude,
like stopping you in your tracks.
So I think also, and something that we always like to say is like, there's these portals sort of open in our lives, right? And it's like, you either have this opportunity to like walk through and face whatever's on the other side, or you have to sit there and realize you might just get stuck in this karmic loop, and the lessons are going to keep coming and coming. Yes. I literally just talked to one of my clients about this today, it's like, you kind of get to the point where it's like, I was like going through those. I was like so scared that the loop was going to come back again around. That I was like, you gotta break the pattern.
Totally. It's like breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
And when is that going to happen? Are you going to have that reminder again and again and again? Yeah. Or can you just recognize it for what it is and make a change? But then, of course, that requires a bit of self-awareness and deep inner growth. And
well, you got to have the courage to do that. And so, just to leave a practice that you've worked at for all those years and then to walk away, and there couldn't have been a whole lot of certainty that yoga was going to be the path. Maybe, you enjoyed it and all that kind of stuff. But
sure.
When you walked out of law, you weren't certified. Right. And
no, I wasn't. But that said, I was, what I did was I reduced my hours. So I became a kind of a part-time commitment in the law, and with a view to slowly transitioning out of it, doing the right thing by my mom, saying, my mom would always say to me, when are you going back to the law? She'd always say, don't you think that is what brings you happiness? And don't you think you want to go back to it? And so there was this sort of self-questioning, because she would always push me towards doing something steadfast, something reliable, and something that would always, provide financial and other security. And so as a mom, she obviously wants to make sure that you're okay. And so this is, I sort of vacillated a bit, but I think that's normal I didn't just suddenly go from X to Y. It was a transition. And as you mentioned earlier, the transitions are just that. They are slow change. And then you tweak your behavior, your habits, and until you become that new entity or that new form of yourself. Yeah,
it's like 2 steps forward, maybe 1 back. What am I doing? And there's all that doubt and uncertainty, and you get the negative voices sometimes in your head. And I guess the one thing I heard this great line, and I can't remember where I heard it, but the guy was talking about like the vision that we see for our lives. It's just like the glasses that, if we have reading glasses and then I hand them to somebody else, they can't read out of them.
No, totally. Yeah.
And it's just like you have this vision for your life because you've done the work. And no matter how much somebody loves you or cares for you and whatever, they can't put that vision on because they can't see the same vision. And the other thing is, sometimes the people closest to us give us the most resistance to making the change that we feel is really inherent and needed in our life. And that is really hard, whether it could be, it could be, brothers and sisters or somebody within the family who they genuinely care about you. But the other reality for that is too, when people see you doing the work, you taking the masks off, you getting real, you being really authentic, it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable because
That's
they
it.
don't want to do that. So they're going to kind of pump the brakes for you because your reality check's kind of scaring the shit out of me. So I don't want to do that.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I have, and a great example is that I have a identical twin sister.
Yeah, right.
So my twin sister who went through, she went through exactly the same education as me. We went to law school together. We did everything together until I went on to do law, and she pivoted and changed and decided to study fashion. But the thing is, her life experience was pretty much the same as mine. And she had, she was very supportive through this transition, this change that I made that we're discussing. But as you said, she's going to look through a different lens because she's worried that things are not going to work out for me. So
Right.
she's, and it might have been confronting for her because, you know, my parents being immigrant parents, you know, it's all about prestige and image, and it's about standing, especially in a traditional Indonesian household, you know. And so anything other than doctors, lawyers, or engineers or whatever, you know, they're thinking, what? You're doing what? You know, they really, it's not part of their paradigm.
So while you're in this sort of portal transition, I mean, there had to be moments where you were not, I mean, like a lot of times we have those days where we're like, this is so clear and everything. And a lot of times we have days where you feel really down and questioning and dark and like, I need to sprint in the opposite direction. So what were, like, as you were going through those pieces, were there any practices or like mantras or things that you held on to that really helped you see this through and get to the other side?
And then, Yanti, so it sounds like too, up until the polo incident, you weren't really a meditator or really a practitioner in mindfulness per se and all that. Okay. So this whole journey kicked that whole thing off as you got introduced to yoga. Okay. So okay. So go ahead.
Yeah. You're good at the chronology, Bruce. So, but you're right that, great questions from both of you. So I was not a meditator at that point, but then as Emma suggested, that really kickstarted a whole different, the whole realm opened up to me, and I found I had a real facility with Sanskrit. I don't know why, and I have to say that I regard myself as a person of faith, and we grew up in an interesting household where my parents were Muslim, but the kids went to Church of England schools, and I really loved being part of the church community and doing choir and all of that. And then, of course, we have grandparents who are Hindu Buddhist. And when I found yoga, the whole link towards Hinduism came alive. And I just discovered all the mantra. I was able to recite them really quickly. I don't know why, but I was able to learn whole pages and pages of scriptures and recite them. And I found a lot of solace in that. And and at the same time started to journal a lot, meditate, and so the philosophical precepts, all of the theology side of the yoga tradition, because I must say not everyone who gets into yoga is interested in that stuff, but I happened to be, and I really embraced it. And it was like, I also saw a therapist obviously at the same time, but I'm not obviously, but I decided to have that plus the philosophical work, and it was very healing. It was really interesting how that came to be part of who I am today. Yeah.
Okay, so just taking off on the word healing. So we know, the polo incident now is fairly long behind. You've recovered from that. But that physical injury then opens you up to other dimensions of healing that maybe you weren't even aware that you needed. And it sounds like as you tripped into yoga and then you had this natural connection within the family for Hinduism and Buddhism, and then you had this natural inclination. And so that opened everything up. And so the healing really is kind of from the external to the internal on this journey, it sounds like.
It was very much. And I did look at it as almost like a message from above. And that's where I have to credit yoga for spearheading a journey into more of the philosophical underpinnings. And that's where it wasn't just an asana practice for me, but it was the many, many layers that you can delve into in order to make it more of a comprehensive, all-embracing practice that wasn't just for cardiovascular or for exercise, let's say. It was just a lifestyle. And I know that that's a little cliche, but there was so many layers that even to this day remain undiscovered. And I see it as a continuous, never-ending journey into just learning. And it just never stops because, one of the questions you asked, I think, at the end, Emma, of that great PDF you sent, I think that one of the questions was, what was one of your hidden pearls? And I thought about that question, and I thought to myself, well, the hidden pearl for me is something that isn't something recent. It's actually an old mantra, or rather the very first mantra I ever learned. But when I revisit it today, all those years later, it means something much more layered and something different to me. And so I look at it as if it's something fresh. And I see, oh my God, I didn't see that way back then, but I now see so many other layers to that mantra. And later on, I'll share it with you. But
yeah, I need to know this mantra now.
Okay.
It's wild though. Yeah, it's very interesting how old things can become new again. And the so-called hidden pearls was something that was always there, but it was hidden in plain sight. Right. Something I recited every day. And yet when I come back to it today in my current age, I look at it and I think, oh my God, yeah, duh, so, you know what I mean? Like, stuff that becomes apparent and gets reinforced, and there's a beautiful metaphor there, and there's just so much other stuff that you think, how could I not have seen that? But you know what? Maybe I wasn't meant to until now, yeah. Just stuff like that. And so I sort of feel that things become new and very layered and more substantive as we grow and as we age.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we're just not able or ready to see what's right in front of us, and so it's okay. And I will concur with that. And Emma's the certified teacher. I'm just a little yogi on that. But, exactly. The thing about it is, it does have so many layers, both like physically, yes, your body strengthens and tones and becomes more flexible. And so like any pose you can take to deeper levels. But the other thing it opens up, it's the same thing internally though. Like if you're paying attention, so that's that same journey, you work through this, and then this opens because you were now in a new place, and then it changed, and it's just ever evolutionizing, evolving. Thank you. But anyway, something like that. But it does that like on all kinds of levels if you're willing to pay attention and kind of let it do the work. So anyway, well, I want to shift into eventually about starting the studio, but go ahead.
So when you first started practice, or I guess when you were like, what type of yoga really pulled you in? Obviously you were doing a lot of therapeutic stuff, but was there, like vinyasa or kundalini, or was there a practice that, was just like, this is it, and maybe this is like what you ended up studying, but what pulled you in deep?
Well, initially it was the restorative or the therapeutic stuff, as you mentioned, because I was on this sort of healing journey. Nothing fast would have been right for me. But then as I learned more about the yoga, I experimented. My cousin was really into Bikram, and she dragged me into Paris, and we used to, would do regular Bikram classes. I think you have to experience the extremes in order to come to your, to your level of what you need. So I did the extreme Bikram for a couple of years with her, and I still, from time to time I'll do hot yoga. That's the crazy thing. I had my own hot yoga studio, and nowadays I don't really need the hot yoga. It's very interesting. I'm talking about phases that you go through. And after that, fast forward a few years, because I was doing Bikram a lot, I then realized there was this thing called vinyasa, which didn't have to be heated, and that you could amp up if you wanted to amp it up, or you could tone it down if you wanted to tone it down. You could add, modify, make it your own. And I realized that was what I really enjoyed. So I got involved in vinyasa, and but ultimately the teacher training I did was in hatha. So I did the hatha yoga training, and then closely thereafter I did an Ashtanga training. And I have to say, fast forward, I really got into Kundalini over COVID, over the pandemic. And I just, really found some beautiful practices there, and mantra as well. Just a seated practice in Kundalini. And that was very powerful for me to getting through the challenges of the pandemic. But I actually have to say, my practice is a bit of a hodgepodge. It's a real kind of blend of a whole bunch of styles, because I match the style according to the mood and my energy level, and also what issue I might want to address. So, I does that answer your question, Emma?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I practice too. Sometimes I'm like so devout in Kundalini and it's all I want to do. And then other times I just want to flow. It's like I mix flow with running, and it's just what feels good.
Totally. Yeah. And I no longer, I must just say that I no longer beat myself up if I don't do a full hour of whatever I started off doing. It might morph into something completely different depending on the energy flow or what is happening in the head as well. And so I don't say, I should do this and I should do that. I just let it be what it is. And sometimes it's just sitting and doing more meditation than it is movement. So I am better about that and letting it be what it is. Yeah.
Well, I just want to really affirm that, especially for our listeners. So we have a lot of veterans that listen to our stuff and all that kind of thing. And so they have a lot of they carry a lot of guilt and baggage and, those kind of things around that. And I think that's one of the things when we work with mindfulness with them and encourage yoga is it's not a judgment thing. So having a lot of love and grace for yourself and listening to the internal as well as your body about what you need right now in order to feel either relaxed or whole or whatever it is. If you need to really burn in workout, then you can go get it. But
sure,
you need to chill. So having the grace to be able to do that is such a gift, I think, and not beat yourself up. And there's that balance, you got to do enough, but do it all the time.
Cool. I mean, that's a lovely segue too into the question of why I became involved in the Warrior Flow School, because Adrian Molina, who is the founder of this school, he and I led the teacher trainings at my studio all those years ago, and we started in 2013. And it made sense then during COVID actually, when he invited me to join the faculty, it made sense because we had worked together so well in tandem, leading different programs at Earth Yoga. And what I loved about his program was that he was amazing, doing some amazing work in Miami with hospitals, with shelters. He was going into prisons. He was really looking at the underserved populations and the under-resourced populations, which is what I came to realize was what I wanted to be doing as well, where I wanted to make yoga for more people, not just people who are fit and strong and who are able-bodied, but serving those who perhaps you wouldn't see in a normal New York studio, right? So how was I able to parlay into that iteration of myself was really through the work with Warrior Flow. And so that's the type of teacher I am today. I really make my classes trauma-informed. I'm very aware of people coming to the mat with all kinds of issues, not being able to do everything necessarily that you cue or that you direct. And so I wanted to make it more accessible and adaptive for whoever wanted to show up. So,
okay. Well, I definitely want to hear more about the Warrior Flow. So can you then, after all the practitioner stuff, can you just tell us a little bit, because another transition then, owning a studio is a deal. And then once you got into the studio, then you already mentioned kind of becoming a teacher, doing the teacher trainings. Yeah. And now you're kind of teaching the teachers who do the teacher training. And so just maybe, you don't have to quite, but there's some transitions in there. So I think opening a studio in New York sounds super expensive, kind of difficult, really competitive. And again, female entrepreneur, fairly new to the industry and all that kind of stuff. So what obstacles did you have? What was the mindset then? And how did you overcome a little bit of that, I guess? And then just walk us through, because your evolution has been from, and I know you're still an instructor to some extent, but you really seem to enjoy the teaching part of it. and that kind of curriculum. So just how's your yoga life been? And at some point we need to talk about karate, because you're also really involved in karate, and that's been going on. And I don't know very much. I've been taking some Hapkido, so I've been doing a little of that. I'm travel a little bit too much to be very good. I just know just enough to kind of be kind of silly looking. But anyway, so I'm really curious about that journey as well. So, because we don't want to keep you all day on your anniversary. So maybe just backfill that for us just a little bit. And again, some of the obstacles and how you overcame those things and how you had the confidence to move forward with some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start any project that's a little bit out of your depth, there's a big learning curve, and you have to be okay with and humble enough to say, I don't know the answer to this, and I'm going to do my darndest to try and find out what the answer might be and do the research, ask the people that know. And so that's kind of what happened to me when we were on our honeymoon, Richard and I, and we were in Bali at the time, and Richard gets a call from his then landlord. And the landlord, Jay-Z, says, do you want to take this floor in the same building where Richard's karate dojo was? So I was contiguous with Richard initially when I started Earth Yoga. And I said, yeah, I want to do it. I know that I'm going to transition. I want to do the bar exam in New York City. I know that I don't want to go back to practice law at this point. I'm up for it. And this is where I believe my legal background really helped me, because, my clients were, multinationals and big banks and sort of medium to large size businesses. So it was a big jump to go into small business. But that said, there are many principles in business that you can apply to making something smaller successful. So I was able to use that background. And I always say, because people say, oh, why did you jump from the law to something so different and running, earning and operating and managing your own yoga studio? And I said, well, these sorts of things happen and one does these pivots in the journey. But I do not for a moment regret having done law, because everything I learned in my legal practice has helped me, especially with interpersonal relationships, so managing people. And when I manage people, because I had so much experience in the law, managing 26 teachers on the schedule and also getting inside their heads. I'm a bit of an empath, so I like listening to people's problems. and I try to help them as much as I can. That was something that kind of came naturally. And I was able to do the relationship building side more than I probably ever expected to. But I think that is the recipe for why I was able to make the studio successful. It's because I had great, solid relationships with the teachers, and I credit the experience as a lawyer with being able to transition in that regard. Because I think a lot of businesses don't. I'm generalizing, but they might not necessarily focus on the quality of relationships. And this was way back so we're talking 2008, talking into 2000, so coming into the decade where I was running and operating Earth Yoga, and when it was really successful. Relationships was a lot of what I enjoyed doing as well.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It sounds like a huge pivot, because I've come back and forth from law to other things repeatedly. But the law thing never disappoints in a way, because just law school itself and the way it teaches you to read and write and think and all that kind of stuff. And then, my practice wasn't particularly in business, litigation and criminal defense, but there's still the interaction with people, asking the questions, organizing things and all that kind of stuff. So while we do pivot, it's not like you leave all those skill sets behind and they don't apply. So, okay. So you're cruising along, and then just pre-COVID, it seems like you have some kind of notion, because you could foresee the future, to sell your studio, but I'm not sure how that was.
Yeah. In 2019, just prior to the pandemic, we had no clue that this was actually going to transpire, obviously, but we got approached by the ultimate buyer of the business, and we had a 6-month period of transition where I trained her to take over the helm, so to speak. And that was it was wild, because we had no clue that tough times were going to be ahead. But the thing was that Richard and I knew at this point where I'd run and operated the studio for 11 years, I knew that something had to give. He was traveling a lot for his seminars. He was working a lot overseas. We were barely seeing each other. We had to create a change in our lifestyle so that we could do more things together. And so I was fully focused on the studio and its success. And then we just had to make a decision that I would spend more time with him traveling, that I would help him run his international organization. And, it was almost as if my time spent in the studio and running it prepared me for the transition into helping him to build the relationships within, he's in 20 countries. So just working on, I like languages too. So, I didn't see language as a barrier, but I love the nurturing and the supporting and encouraging aspect of building those relationships. And that's what happened. So I transitioned into more of a role in his organization. And I sort of tended to the so-called flock. It was, I feel like what I was meant to do. And I was speaking to my talents and speaking to my, people like to tell me stories. They like to complain. They like to basically share. And then what I do is I take those comments and the feedback from people, and I feed it back into the relevant power structure, and we fix things. And so I just sort of felt like, wow, this is what I was meant to be doing. And I made a realization as I transitioned. It wasn't that clear as it was happening, but with time, as I flowed into that role, especially over the pandemic, I felt like, okay, this is great. This is what I'm meant to be doing. Even though I'm not going to lie, changing gears and saying goodbye to the studio, that if I were to look back on it, I probably could have done it a bit more sensitively instead of the business-like way that I sort of cut ties. I maybe had burnout, and I think that was really it. It was time to move on, and I just knew that if I wanted to evolve in a business relationship, because obviously working with my husband and doing everything together, we had to something that had to give. And it was okay in my books to let go of the studio at times. It was kind of God-given, and it was almost like it was the next.
Yeah.
And I was meant to have read it that way,
It's interesting hearing this part of the story because, like, lawyer is super heavy masculine, right? So that it's a lot of fire, right? So we have our Ida, but then you have your Pingala, but then it's also the yoga studio and like managing a business like that. Like that's a lot of fire. That's a lot of masculine energy.
Totally.
And then, it just seems like this big energy was like, Yanti, you just need to receive and like lean into the loving, like feminine.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That is so right on. It really was, Emma. And I think it continues to be. But it is also like the balancing that you mentioned earlier, though, Emma. How we have to see things when we see them, and maybe we won't absorb the lesson in that moment, but maybe it will come around again and we see it in a different light. And, the hidden pearls idea, which I mentioned earlier, where I revisit certain mantra or I revisit lessons and I see different layers and different substantive lessons from them. And so I love that there's this seeming contrast between the Ida Pingala, the light, the dark, the masculine, the feminine, the high, the low, all of the celestial, terrestrial, all those contrasts that we're always drawing. That it is a play. It's a play between the two constantly. And this is actually a perfect segue into the idea of yoga and karate, because people will say to me, oh, isn't that weird? You do both. You do martial arts on one hand and then you do yoga on the other. And I say, well, no, I think they're more like the yin and the yang, where, the symbol is very much an integrated whole of the black and the white feeding into one another. They're not at all separate. And so they're one needs the other. And they're constantly, not constantly, but there's this ebb and flow of being side by side and feeding into and flowing, ebbing and flowing into one another. So you have sometimes strong masculine, sometimes you have strong feminine, but there is a play always between the two. And it's just the challenge, I think, is getting the balance. And maybe I'm closer to the balance than I was before. I don't know. But yeah, it's a lovely point. Thank you for bringing that up, Emma.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really feel that is what happened, actually, with that transition.
So, and I know he's very, practicing Hapkido, pretty much a master. Just kidding.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
He's not. He's gone to like 10 classes.
Yeah.
But
Just
karate is very... Could you just talk to us about karate and like what, because obviously your husband was into it, but you have found such a love in it, and a purpose in it. So maybe like, what are the principles? We talked about this earlier, but what?
Well, you know what would be really helpful, just a little, because you say the word karate, but it's like, I was just reading some stuff on what your husband does and that, and it just seemed like this whole subworld. And then there was this giant umbrella and there's all this other. So like, is there a way to just do a snapshot on the world of karate? And then it seems just like we were talking about yoga, there's different kind of schools or whatever you want to call them, and that whole kind of thing. Because karate really has a different energy. I know how the master at my, he had very kind of descript for different formations and all that kind of stuff about the type of energy and what they're about and what they're trying to accomplish and all that kind of stuff. So just wondering, so what is, maybe describe at least, the kind of karate that you guys are involved in, and maybe how that's maybe a little bit unique or different than maybe some of the other forms.
Well, I think that it's not a bad analogy to look at karate as similar to yoga in that you do have all the styles. And you may have heard of Goju-ryu, you may have heard of Shito-ryu and other martial arts like Kempo and Aikido and Judo, and you may have heard of Sumo. And what Shotokan karate is all about is karate is so-called, if you break down the etymology of the word, it's empty hand. And the idea or the principle is that it's a martial art, and it was developed over many hundreds of years, originally in the place called an island called Okinawa. The style that my husband does.
I'll be there I'll be there in a couple of months.
Oh my God, really?
Oh, I was from Okinawa. That's awesome.
You'll have to take class.
So yeah,
I will not know anything that's going on. The language, yeah.
Yeah, but it's so it's basically kicks and punches. It's all mostly linear. So kicking, punching, blocks, and what we call prearranged sequences, which we call kata. And they're the basic fundamentals, but the entire syllabus covers 26 prearranged forms. And so we have a syllabus that we run through in our program at our dojo. And what Richard is he was British national team, and he was also in Japan for over a decade, and so speaks perfect Japanese, and he's so fully immersed in that whole world of Shotokan because he was one of the very lucky few who trained under some of the masters who are today, sadly, who have passed away. But that's why he calls his group the traditional Shotokan group. And so he was able to learn under those masters way back in the 90s, actually coincidentally at the same time that I was posted in Indonesia as a lawyer. So he was in Japan, he was in Tokyo, I was in Indonesia at the same time, but he was learning under some of the masters in what they call a Kenshusei program, which is basically an instructor's program, and he was one of the first Westerners to ever do the program. And so he did that for 3 years, and he then went on to be an instructor within the organization where he trained, and he continues. It's the only thing he's ever done. He's tried a couple of other segues into different professions and different work, but he's always returned to talking about his raison d'etre. That is what he's meant to be doing. And And so he set up this organization. After leaving the original organization, he set up his own with one of the current founders who's still with us, and in the US. And then, the rest, they say, is history. So he's regarded as one of the leaders in his field, and this is the style Shotokan is one of the traditional styles that is still taught today, along with all those Goju-ryu and Shitoryu and a few others. But as traditional as you can get, because he tries to stay close to the way that the original masters taught this style. And this is what we try to do. And to your question, and I think one of the questions you asked was, it's interesting that I put it on as something I also love, because I was in Taekwondo, which is a Korean martial art, when I was young, and I did it as a teenager, had a bit of a hiatus, and then came back to it as a young adult. And so I did have martial arts in my blood, and I was, and it was pretty easy to come back into it. And when I started again in this different style, in the Shotokan style, versus the Korean style, which is a little different. But that was a little kind of synopsis.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. That's really helpful.
It's interesting that there's the 26 poses, like in Hot 26 or Bikram.
Interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like,
do you have a favorite pose?
Oh, in Bikram?
Yeah, in Bikram, like the Hot 20 or it's 26 poses, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
right?
I guess one of the ones I really like is the standing posture, which is trying to remember, but the one where you bend over and with your index finger and thumb on the big toe, and then you fold forward. Yeah. That's always escaped me. It's so difficult. It's one I try to keep doing and try to master. But yeah, what's yours? Do you have one?
Well, probably I love that one. I love floor bow. I always love doing floor bow. But do you have a favorite karate pose?
Oh, good one. Technique. I think it would be knife hand, which is this. So I have supporting on the chest, but this acts like a knife or what they call a katana or a blade, a big sword. Yeah, and it is a little bit cheesy because oftentimes people will make fun of that posture and they think that they're doing kung fu, but really the right way to do it is this way, is to blade out the edge of your hand and to really have that as a hard edge. Yeah, and then the other hand is there at your chest for support. But that I like that because it's I also do sword work, so I like that because it reminds me to always be sharpening your blade and sharpening your skills and skills acquisition. So yeah, that's just a little reminder for me that the things that we're always aiming to refine and polish and hone, and it's an endless thing. It's just ongoing, and
Well, speaking of sharpening your sword, transition. I'd like to transition into just all the work that you've done with domestic violence victims, and kind of sharing your practice and your wisdom and these strengths that you've learned with different women. So could you tell us a little bit about what you do in that and your organizations? And
so what happened during COVID was, I mentioned earlier that what happened was I was kind of stuck in the UK at the time, and I knew that a lot of the means by which I was going to be able to communicate with our community was through Zoom or through FaceTime. And so what I did was I started to set up these meetings with the various country heads and just people in the different countries representing dojos within the group. And a lot of the women who were involved wanted to have these moments of sharing. And they really enjoyed the Zoom calls where we could just express ourselves and talk generally with no particular agenda, but just to share. And I started a Facebook private page. And it was really only intended for women because I wanted them to feel safe. that if they wanted to share anything regarding personal life, whether it was dojo life, anything to do with their direct superiors in the dojo context, their senseis, their instructors, then they would be able to trust that that information was not going to be shared outside that group. And so what happened was everyone started to share both DM wise and then by email, also live on these Zoom calls. And I realized that there was something there. Something was happening in terms of the depth of the sharing. And then I realized that a lot of these women were actually suffering from trauma based on abusive relationships, whether that be sexual, emotional, or, you know, any type of physical violence and any type of shape or form that this abuse could possibly take. I realized that this was an area of, in need of advocacy and support. So I started to do these regular meetups, and it's a very, very informal way of just giving support to this community. So we started out very small, and then we grew to about 100 women, and then it grew slowly, exponentially larger. And then we started going offline, and we started meeting by Zoom calls, and by emails. We started sharing community and sharing support through emails. We're actually now in the throes of trying to find a better forum or platform. But they were really I called it the women's leadership group, but it was really, you know, a whole group of karate women who came from traumatic backgrounds or with stories of trauma, and they wanted to heal. And the great thing about this karate group was that now they're starting to use yoga modalities. So there you have the overlap with yoga and meditation. And I'm starting to introduce, and actually a couple of the women are now doing teacher trainings. And so they're doing the good work of sharing their knowledge and their practices with a broader group of women. So, it was interesting early on, the hierarchy, because in the Shotokan karate world, it's extremely male dominated. At the top of our group, there are very well-meaning male instructors, and I was asked to explain why I wanted to do this women's leadership group. And I said, well, we need advocacy because of all these issues. And the thing is that the men, as well-meaning and as sincere as they are and were at the time, this is way back in 2021, they didn't understand what was going on behind the scenes, because women weren't articulating and sharing beyond just with other women what was going on. And so I guess I stumbled upon something that really really reminded me that we need to be of service in other ways other than just teaching in a yoga studio. Do you know what I mean? And so that's when my work with Warrior Flow School became more intense, and when we started collabing on a lot of work and programs with the faculty. So yeah, it was something that morphed in a very organic way into something more concrete. And so we have the umbrella of this women's circle that we do as part of the Warrior Flow School, which meets once a month. But I do feel we're as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of in the throes of looking for a more stable platform and setting up a website and being more, because we're getting a lot of interest from people beyond karate who are interested in being part of the group. So we're in a sort of a transition stage of trying to find the right form that's right for people, women who are involved, because we don't want to scare them off from the intimacy of the smaller group. Was beautiful.
Yeah,
it encourages sharing. It encourages trust and ultimately healing, because people are not afraid to share their vulnerability, and they're not afraid to share some of their direct experience. And it really is. It was an incredible, and it continues to be an incredible learning process for me as I navigate these waters, because I'm not trained in social work, but I'm perhaps ultimately going to look at something like doing a social work program. I'm not sure, but I'd love to be able to bring different skills to the table in the future.
Yeah, just really what you're describing is these different modalities of healing and how people are unique.
Yeah.
The trauma is unique to them. And I guess, one of the things I just wonder, have you found some cornerstones or foundational components around healing? So I work in the arena of restorative justice, circle dialogues with crime victims, families impacted by crime and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of conflict resolution work So, but I guess what I was wondering, so one of kind of our themes is, like until a person has an opportunity to tell their story, it's really difficult to heal. So there's a sense of this need to be heard.
Yes.
And at least to share it, even if there's not a response other than I hear you and I love you or whatever. But is that part, just part of the healing process within this context, I guess? And then other than, I guess, being in a group with other folks centered around having some experience of trauma and just as a support and having a chance to tell your story, are there other aspects of healing that you've seen that have been part of this journey?
Yeah, so what I've noticed, it's a great question, Bruce. So what I've noticed when we do meet in a group context, what happens is that the sharing and the support is pretty general and generic. That what happens is the real healing and the real sharing of exact details of what actually happens or has happened to the victims happens one-on-one. And so I get and this is, Richard can't believe the types of emails I get, but I get these sorts of cri de coeurs, and detailed descriptions of what some of the women have gone through. And so, again, I'm at that point where I, on a no-names basis, I share some of the principles we have mental health counselors, and we have therapists and psychologists involved in the faculty at Warrior Flow School. And so these are the people I draw in and ask for assistance from them in order to work out ways to provide a safe space for this sharing. Because I'm not going to pretend that I have the know-how and the knowledge base, but I absolutely know when to draw in those people with expertise. Yeah. And so that's the wonderful thing about having the Warrior Flow School as a support system and an infrastructure around what's happening behind the scenes, if you like, or in parallel. And so we're getting the insights and the technical expertise from the right people at the right moments. And so I guess I'm a facilitator. If you could give me a name, it's that. And I've seen enough of life to know when it's appropriate to pass it over and to really ask for professional input.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know whether that answered the question.
It's perfect. It's all good. Yeah, no, I'm just, it's a deep subject. So that's maybe that's another podcast. The winning circle and the healing techniques. So,
but it's amazing what you're doing. And I think it's very cool that Richard is your husband, but it still takes a lot of courage to present those stories and,
Yeah, thanks, Emma.
Hold councilmen accountable, those people who we kind of look up to and study from and hold in such high regards. And
totally,
when the men don't see what the women are saying, sometimes it's easy to doubt, is this really that big of a deal? Or is this really something that needs to be out there? Or maybe it's not that bad, And so it seems like your swords are very sharp. So I would say, keep up the good fight.
Because you know what, Emma, I have always thought that from sort of the legal experience I have, but also from the time I have have managed the yoga studio, you understand this, both of you, is that you, with a sensitive heart, but also with the active listening skills that we have, it's so important to manage down, so those who are seemingly below you, but also to manage up. And so in the hierarchical arrangement that exists in something like a Shotokan karate organization, we as women, at least in my case in this instance and in this context, I had to learn how to, with respect and just with the right languaging, I had to be able to deliver information that wasn't necessarily always going to be what they wanted to hear. Because they want to hear that everything's going well and that everything's fine and dandy and that there are no issues and that the women are happy. But actually there's a whole undercurrent that they don't know about that is happening and gurgling away. And I see it as a little bit of a mission to convey all that information and to ensure that I'm not doing it in a way that's attacking, but I'm seeking support and I'm seeking alignment from the higher ups. Because to be defensive and to be attacking or to be, to show perhaps because you know how it is in Japan, right? It's extremely, it's all respect based, and if you are higher up, then you have certain languaging that you have to use. And if you're speaking down to someone lower down the so-called totem pole, then obviously different languaging again. And so I'm very aware of that. And it's sometimes a bit of a tiptoeing, but also just knowing how to elicit the best out of everybody in order to get the results that we need and the support and the buy-in from the higher ups. And so have to navigate.
I think that's like the superpower of women too.
Yeah.
Like being able to mold and be that watery and dynamic piece is just, my Kundalini teachers always said like women are actual sorcerers because we can get people to do whatever we want if we know how to really use our voice and our power.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's so true. And I've always said this, and I joke, to Richard that behind every great man is an even greater woman. And I'm guessing that's the case with Bruce. I'm guessing that's the case with your husband. But I'm joking. But I'm sort of half joking because it is a beautiful partnership as well. Yeah, it is. But I do feel there's something that women, as you said, the watery side, that sort of fluid side, that we can.
I just want to point out that water can flow and be all but a tsunami wipes out an entire city with one wave. That's
true. We could be a tsunami.
So
too.
I think the description of water is a good one, but let's not just assume it only has one facet. It's a multifaceted approach or attack depending on where it is.
For sure.
But I'm with you about the subtleties of being able to maneuver that and kind of flow in and around both up and down. I think that is super important. And how to communicate that message and still, because clearly, I would think that organization has values that they profess they want to follow and who they want to be as an organization. And if things for certain females within the organization are not living up to that, there's no way to get there unless you first have to, that's the whole mindfulness piece, right? Step one is awareness. Totally. You can't change anything or fix anything or do anything until one is aware, and then acceptance about what that reality is, and then you can start to figure out where to go from there. So, okay. Well, listen, we've been grinding with you for a long time, so thank you for your patience. So, so that journey we've been on, I've got a list of others, but we better leave that go. We better wrap up a little bit here. But is there anything else about that story or your journey that we haven't gotten to, either as it relates to healing or wellness or something like that, that you feel like that we've left out, or I haven't been bright enough to ask the right question to get to?
I think that Emma, I think you touched on it earlier about the facets of how we as yogis and yoginis have to be. I think we have to. Maybe you didn't actually say this, but you hinted at it. Was that with the very empathetic heart, we have to be able to morph and use qualities. And I'd like to say that there's both the combative side in yoga. Why else are the asana called after warriors? There's that battlefield aspect because we're referring to the Bhagavad Gita and the whole idea of being on on the battlefield and fighting our so-called inner demons. But you've also got that yoga flow. You've got the karate aspect of being outright, there's dominance, the discipline, but it's also in some cases violence. But the meting out of so-called violent acts only when it's necessary. Mm-hmm. So it's the capacity to be able to be violent, but withholding that power of being violent because you're using discernment.
Yeah.
And so I feel that yoga and karate are probably sides of the same coin, if that's the expression, in that they're more similar than you probably think. There's just so much of both that involves the hard and the soft and the light and the dark. And I guess that's why I don't see the two as being in contrast or in contradiction. I see them as really part and parcel of who I am, and it being a nice compliment, shall we say? Right. Yeah. Which I think, shall I read out my little mantra?
Yes. Yeah. That's where that was the next question. So.
Yeah. Just to finish off.
Yeah. And part of that question about the hidden pearls. So the name of the podcast is Hidden Pearls. Yeah. And you're going to be one of our hidden pearls now that we're showcasing to the world, although I know you've been out a little bit. So we do want to talk some point. You can either do this before or after the mantra, but we're curious too about, given the work that you've been doing and, your transitions and life experience, what are one or two things that, as you look around the world right now and or in your community or wherever you want to take it from, gives you hope, that, makes you feel optimistic and hopeful about our future. So you can do that. You can give us the mantra and then fill us in on that or whatever you want to do.
Well, actually, that's a great question. The idea of hope, if there was ever a kind of a silver lining to the pandemic, it was that we were made aware of mental health.
Yeah.
And the importance of it, and the fact that we do not have to have it stigmatized and that we can talk about it openly. And I refer to the time pre-COVID when people, especially guys, didn't really want to talk about seeking help, mental health assistance, or just being able to see a therapist or speak to other men about their inner growth or aspects of their relationships. And now what we're seeing is that there's been sort of not a resurgence, but an increase in people being able to talk openly, because we do acknowledge that as a result of COVID, and without exception, everybody has been touched by the negative effects of it, and the isolation, the just the lack of socialization during lockdowns, and so that's this aspect in a skewed way, I have to say, that gives me hope, because people are actually talking about it. Yeah. And I always have felt that the awareness begins with an actual articulation of an expression of what the problem might be. And so it's a beginning of a dialogue, of an open discussion and expression of what the issues and the problems might be. So that's what kind of gives me hope, that we're now in a time where we're talking about things that we perhaps wouldn't be talking about 3 years ago. Do you feel that?
Well, I certainly feel the two populations that we have most contact with is the NFL community, and then also the veteran community. And I would say in both of those, I think veterans have been working on trying to have that conversation, but I would agree that COVID really, isolation and all that kind of stuff, and obviously the suicide rate and all that kind of stuff for that. But I think also NFL has a whole mental health campaign now. They put it on the helmets, they wear T-shirts about it, and it's okay to talk about it. And there are guys out there that have had, we know Sally Thomas, whose sister, was lost by suicide, and we're kind of part of that story when he was with the Niners, and just people out there advocating and trying to raise awareness, and that you're not alone and it's okay to ask for help. And so I think in a lot of ways that stigma, at least we've named the stigma. I don't know that we're through it or past it.
No, we're not.
But I think at least that you're right, though. Having the conversation, it's okay to bring it up. And for goodness sake, there are people out there that do want to help you if you'll make a call. So I think all that's pretty accurate. So, okay. Are we ready for the mantra? I feel like it's almost like Christmas time.
Oh,
holiday and we're getting a present.
This is from the Bhagavad Gita, and it's chapter 2, verse 14. And it goes like this. Matra sparshas tukanteya shitoshna sukhadukadaha agama paino nityastam stitikshasva bharata. And what it refers to is that summer and winter is like happiness and distress. So happiness and distress is like the coming and going of the seasons. And so we, as humans living this existence, we should acknowledge that we're experiencing happiness, distress, just like we're experiencing summer and winter, as a sense perception. And so we should detach a little from going deeply into the extremities of those characteristics of happiness and distress. And so I'm just going to read a little bit out here. What the transliteration from Sanskrit says is that we must learn to tolerate those things, happiness and distress, without being disturbed. We see that material happiness and distress that we experience from day to day is fleeting and it's transient. So just like summer and winter, it's relentlessly coming and going and coming and going. So can we, as humans, can we stand steadfast, keep breathing, keep being present in the moment, also not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones and for our communities. And at the same time, acknowledge that there are those aspects. So coming back very briefly, I'm just off script here, but coming back to this yin-yang idea. So the characteristics of the yin and the yang, or the, as you said, the Ida Pingala, Emma, the masculine and the feminine, we're blending them constantly, and we're just allowing them to flow and ebb. And we're allowing them to, sometimes the dominant side is going to be the yang, as you mentioned earlier, the running of the studio, or, doing those strong things like being a lawyer and being kick-ass and just hating it, all of those things. And then at other times you're going to have the waning or the softening of certain characteristics in your being. I'm not sure whether I explained it very well, but it is a little bit like, can we integrate all those aspects within us and use our discernment to know when being strong is appropriate, when being soft is appropriate, so on and so forth. So anyway, I can send you the
I love that.
That'd be great.
That was beautiful.
We'll include that.
I love Sanskrit.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you read it a lot. Much nicer than I would have stumbled quite a bit there. That was beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. Well, it does it. And then just the impermanence of all things.
Yes.
The highs and the lows.
Exactly.
So there's, that wave is here now or whatever, but it's not going to be here forever. And that's the same with stages of life or whatever. And so just appreciate the moment for what it is. And you don't, like you said, I really thought that don't get yourself carried off to the extremities of it. Like, be here, be present with it, experience it for what it is, but know it's going to pass, and there'll be something else to replace it eventually.
Absolutely.
So that's the 3 Ps I heard in a song, a message. It's not permanent, it's not perfect, and it's not personal.
Oh, so true.
So everything you're going through, good or bad, is going to pass.
It is.
And nothing is perfect. So we have this idealization, whether it's our family, our relationships, whatever, our children, but none of those things that, and to hold some ideal, it just creates the suffering that we're looking for. So creating space for grace and love and a little bit of perfection built in, because we are human and that's what it is. And then it's not personal, like I like the metaphor that, we're the sky and everything else is the weather, like you said, fall and the winter, and we're just there. This stuff passing through, and it's really not about us. And so if we can kind of let go of our ego and just transmute that whole piece, it's all good. So, okay, then tell us about your charity. Where are we donating some money this week?
Where have I written it down? Okay, so actually I have 2 charities, but the ones that I am 2 that I really love and I'm involved in is supporting Dalit children. So they're the untouchables in southern India who are dealing with illiteracy, poverty, bonded labor, those sorts of issues. So I work with them, and I also work with the Natchan Project, which is mind-body practices for trauma and resiliency for women and kids in these slums of Kampala in Uganda. So those are the two projects I'm deeply involved in, aside from obviously my the karate women and the Warrior Flow School. But if I'll just give you the info and you can.
We'll take care of it.
Yeah,
we'll be very pleased to do that. So we'll make a donation in that name, and that'll be really good. We're glad to support you that way. So I think we did pretty good there getting through that. So that was really good. So just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story and some of those insights around all the things you've overcome and the weaving. I feel very aligned and in balance now.
Right into the shushmana.
Yeah, well, I don't know what any of that is, but I feel like whatever it is, it's all put together. So better. So thank you very much. Anything you want to?
That was wonderful.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank
you, Bruce. It was so lovely to chat.
Okay, so and then can I talk about Hidden Pearls Health?
You can.
So Hidden Pearls podcast is kind of branching off into Hidden Pearls Health. So our own focus on wellness and all that. So again, meditation, mindfulness based with a lot of yoga and that kind of stuff, movement. So we're just wondering about inviting you to be kind of one of our featured guest instructors as part of our kind of platform. And so we'll kind of share some more with you on that. But just maybe a few of the things that you rely on. Could be a short yoga flow or whichever. And Emma's got it much more well defined than I've got it. But we just thought that would be kind of fun for some of our guests to be able to share a couple of those things. That we could include for people just to get to know you maybe a little bit better and some of the things that that work for you and all that kind of stuff, and just to kind of share that. So did I do okay?
Beautiful.
Okay. So anyway, so we'll follow up with that, and just, it won't be too burdensome or anything like that, but we'd sure like to include some of the things that you're doing because you have such a beautiful, graceful energy and spirit, and
thank you.
That itself is healing. And so we'll look forward to kind of sharing some of that. So, all right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Amazing. So cool to be chatting.
Okay.
Thank you for your energy as well.
All right. Well, take care and happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Have fun.
Thanks a lot. So nice to see you guys.